Hello and welcome to the Being Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Bottaro, and today we are talking about the priesthood, formation in the priesthood, what's good, what's not great, and how this specifically relates to our capstone component of our certification program. So I break open a little bit more about our certification that we've launched at the Catholic Psych Institute with one of our star pupils, one of our best students ever. He gets gold stars, especially because he really likes to get gold stars on his assignments. Father Sam Kachuba, who we joke about his need for grades to know that he's doing a good job. But he actually gives a lot of insight into how the formation of the seminary, the formation in the priesthood needs to be supported. And what he's specifically doing now that he's gone through our certification program because of his capstone project, which is to bring the formation of the Catholic Psych model into formation in the seminary and in the priesthood. This is an awesome part about the capstone, about our certification. Building this program and now getting all of these students involved. We have over 100 students now who have signed up, started, and even graduated our program. And each one has a unique vocation, an individual path that God is calling them to. And we are helping students figure out how to use our certification in some way in their life. That's the point of the capstone. So Father Sam in particular, being a priest, realized while going through our program that he wanted to share the formation that he was getting with the priesthood itself, with his local diocese, and then help create a model by which we could actually implement this in other dioceses. So if you're interested at all in the priesthood, in the church, in the ways that our priests could be supported, this is absolutely an episode to listen to. He's got a lot of great insight into sort of where we are right now and what we need to get to a better place. All right, I hope this blesses you, and you could get more information about our certification program, our upcoming summit, at our link here in the show notes. God bless you. I spent the last 10 years learning how to help people using the best techniques available in psychology integrated with the Catholic faith. Now we've figured out that there's a better way to help people than just slapping a Catholic label on the same secular model of therapy you find anywhere else. The real question is, how will we make this shift to a new model of truly Catholic accompaniment, keeping the psychological sciences in mind while opening up to a more human and more effective approach? This podcast is here to give you the answer. Join me and follow along as I take you behind the scenes of what this new model looks like, using recorded audio from sessions working with my team, with colleagues, and even directly with clients. My name is Dr. Greg Bottaro, and I want to welcome you to the Being Human podcast. We are going to talk about capstone.
Okay.
And essentially introducing the audience to what that means for our program for certification as a fruit of integration. For anybody that doesn't know, our certification program, it's essentially a master's. Would you agree?
I've never done a master's, so yes, I'll agree.
Is it like a doctorate?
I don't know enough about what a master's in psychology or counseling or anything like that would look like, or what a doctorate would look like for that matter. So I'll tell you though, I found that what the certification provides is both the classroom and the very, very practical stuff in a way that's different. You know, my whole experience in seminary was you have your theology, you always have practicum attached, except that where I was in seminary, academics were handled by the university, and then everything else was handled in-house in the seminary. And so those two things didn't overlap necessarily.
And you had like volunteer experiences, right? You'd go to like a soup kitchen or
tons of volunteer experiences, and then tons of like, this is your assigned pastoral ministry. So the first summer, like I worked with the Missionaries of Charity for 7 weeks. And then I had my assigned apostolate was teaching catechesis for second graders. And then I went from teaching second graders to working with college students who were studying abroad. So like it's a pretty big age jump.
Real consistent
exactly.
line of training there.
Yeah. And then in the summers I was at a parish.
Okay.
You know,
yeah,
so
that makes
like,
sense.
yeah, you're just kind of bouncing around. You get a little taste of everything, which is great. And then you have your practicum during the year. And so the practicum could be something like a preaching practicum. It could be a counseling practicum. It could be confession practicum, sacraments and everything like that. So you're learning how to do all of this stuff. So there's a lot of stuff just kind of packed in, it's great, but it's not graded, which you know how I feel about grades. It's not graded. And it's also,
You really did not like not being graded.
so it's weird because there was feedback, at least, right? There was like regular, and sometimes so the feedback is brutal. You do your homily practice, and it's you giving a homily to 4 other seminarians. And man, that's the hardest group to ever preach to.
And they're giving you feedback?
And they're giving you feedback on what you just said. And then one of them has to get up and you've got to give feedback. So at first, you're like really intimidated. And so everybody's really nice because they want good feedback for themselves. So everybody's really nice to the first guy who goes and then like, okay, see how nice we all were? And then you get fed up with it because you're like, that guy's homily was terrible. That was awful. Like everything you said was silly and ridiculous and I don't respect you anymore. You know? And so you have to learn how to it's good training because you have to learn how to give constructive criticism and feedback and how to actually help a guy.
But not burn bridges with guys that are like your brothers for the rest of your life.
Whereas the confession practice I thought was really fascinating because you go into confession practice and it's a totally different thing. You've got a priest who's playing the part of a penitent and he has to kind of give you the scenario. So like, I'm a second grader coming for first confession. And of course, he's a 57-year-old man who's 6 feet tall, who's sitting there and he puts on the voice and he talks like a little kid. It's like, I'm the mother superior of the local convent and you're there to hear confessions for them. And then like kind of evolves. So you start with the really, softball kind of confessions where it's all really simple stuff. And then you go to the bigger stuff and they try to give you a sense of what it's like to be in the confessional. And of course, you're trying to think of how am I supposed to help this person make an integral confession and do a good job. And you end up asking stupid questions, or you say the wrong thing, you give bad advice, or you just like totally put your foot in your mouth about it. And it's fantastic.
That sounds one of my
like
favorite
things.
Really great.
It's
a great formation program.
It's so good. It's so much fun to do. What I loved in the certification was that there's the hands-on training. You get to kind of observe. So you have the observed supervision. You're kind of watching, this is what supervision looks like. And then you get your first mentee as a student mentor, and you're learning how to do the mentorship, and you're making mistakes along the way and trying to correct them. And so you're figuring out by actual lived experience. And that's the most fascinating piece to me. I guess that's what they do in a master's program, so let's call it a master's program.
So I guess I was saying just more in general, a generic workload of like how much is actually in the CPMAP certification. A lot of times people, when we first started, before I knew better, I didn't really explain how much work it was. In our first pilot class, they were like ready to drop out. They were like, we had no idea what we were getting into. Because online, you get these courses now, and they're like an online course or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, 1 hour a week of a video, and maybe there's 6 of them. This is very different.
Yeah. Well, I think the saving grace for me on a personal level was that I got my hands on the reading list.
Yeah, you started early.
About 3 months before we actually started. So I was doing reading for level 1 ahead of time, and I then had to do the reading for all the other levels because I didn't have that reading list ahead of time. I just had the books. I knew what I needed to have. But at least for the first level, I felt like I could get into it because I'd done so much of the reading ahead of time.
Yeah.
The other levels, though, I was reading right along, or I was behind in the reading.
Yeah, so it's a lot.
I was never ahead in reading.
It's a lot. And then, but the program, I purposefully wanted our program to be transformative. And I've thought about my own training, my own education, and I've had to fill in a lot of gaps.
Sure. In
different ways. And there's no perfect program. And I've tried to learn from where I had to fill in the gaps after the fact, so that if I could go back and do it all over again, or if I could build a program for other people to not have to go through what I went through where I was missing some pieces, then we could build that in and give that to students right off the bat. So there's different components of our program. The lectures, as the normal academic experience, reading, assignments, even if they're not graded to your satisfaction. We also have...
I like red marks on my papers.
We don't do red marks.
We do feedback. We do
I
application.
know they say that's bad for self-esteem, but I really like that.
We don't do it we crush your self-esteem in a lot of other ways. But it's more effective to think about what you're learning, how you're integrating it, how you're applying it, how it's transforming you and changing you. But then we have the small group experience, which is sort of a mandatory part of the program.
Yeah.
And then you have the individual mentorship. So you actually have a training director walking with you. And then we have what I want to talk about today, which is the capstone. And, this is where I felt in all of my education that the emphasis is always on sort of what's happening now. And there's a big push on getting students in, getting people to sign up, getting people to come to your university, sell your program on the front end. And then they're in there. It's like, keep them in your program till they graduate.
Right.
And make sure that, they're checking all the boxes. I've never been in a place that was really focused on what am I going to do once I graduate.
Yeah.
And so I felt, and maybe there are good places that do focus more on that, but just that was my experience. So when I was building a program, I was thinking, all right, how can I make this really clear that I am as invested in our students' future as I am in their, present participation. And so this capstone idea came up where it was like, all right, I'm going to work individually with every student to figure out how they are going to graduate and then do something in the world of meaning with what they've learned in our certification. And then we purposefully tied it into the discernment of spirits and the discernment component of the certification. So you're learning how to help other people and discern, which obviously was not new for you, but for some students it is. Starting with interiority and awareness, and then discernment of spirits, and then vocational emphasis and what is God calling us to. So you're learning how to do that for other people, but then you're also getting it done to you as you're going through it.
Yeah.
And so for you, actually, I'm really glad you started talking about the seminary, because your capstone was such an awesome work of God. And it was in my heart from the beginning that I wanted to do something like what you ended up doing.
Please say more about how great it is.
It's no red marks on this paper. You have just gold stars.
Ah, yes.
Just A+,
all I ever wanted.
100 smiley faces all over the paper.
Oh, man.
So let's back up a second,
Yeah.
because, okay, you had a really good seminary experience. You had good formation. That's not necessarily the case for all of your brother priests.
Correct.
Let's start with places that you see gaps in seminary formation for priests.
Before I get to that, can I just say something about the capstone that I really appreciate about how the certification sort of evolved in present moment time?
Sure.
The capstone at first was kind of like, do you want to do something to like start your own business, to do mentorship? In my case, it was like, well, obviously I'm not going to do that because I'm a priest.
Right.
So we had talked a lot about marriage prep.
Yeah.
And because I have a heart for marriage prep. I love working with couples as they're getting ready for marriage and everything. But what started to come up, and this is where the discernment was really happening, and it was so beautiful to watch that discernment happening actively as a shared discernment. So the individuals who were going through the certification, and then you and Catholic Psych and everything, all the feedback that was coming in, it started to evolve into the partnerships that now exist between some of the graduates and Catholic Psych. And it expanded so much. And I think that opened up a whole lot of avenues.
Yeah.
And it also, I think on a personal level, made me feel really free, because the thing that was changing for me was that it wasn't so much worrying about or thinking about, I'm going to use this just in parish ministry or for counseling in a pastoral setting or for marriage preparation. It unlocked for me a deep desire to help priests that I wasn't anticipating. And so that's where the capstone ended up going. And so I started looking at seminaries, seminary formation, because actually one thought that I had was right at the time that I was going through this, or just before, I guess, the new program of priestly formation came out. And so with the new program, there's this There's this thing at the end that I still don't fully understand. I'm not in seminary formation. I don't work in that area anymore, so I'm out of practice with all of it. But there's this thing tagged on to the end of seminary formation called the vocational synthesis stage. And I still don't really know what the vocational synthesis stage is supposed to be, other than kind of like an internship where a guy, just before he's ordained a priest, is like no longer in an academic theological program, and he's now learning how to apply all of this stuff.
I think that's the USCCB's attempt to try to correct some of what was missing before. So let's like, how would you anticipate? What do you imagine that was correcting? Like, let's go back to like gaps that you might have seen in other brother priests or other programs that you've seen in that the other people have been through.
So I had this conversation with a priest I know in seminary formation, and I actually kind of want to push back on the idea that it's trying to make up for a gap, or it's almost like it's trying to solve a problem that's not actually there. There's other problems. Don't get me wrong. Like, seminary formation is by no means perfect, but there's this sense that somehow seminarians have no concept of what pastoral ministry is like. But if you look at what every seminary, I mean, I don't know of a single seminary that doesn't send guys for regular experiences with parish life, regular experiences.
So it's meant to just be another sort of like work experience where you just kind of go work in another soup kitchen kind of thing.
This one, it's more that you're under like direct supervision of a pastor for an extended period of time. And that's also going to be the place where you probably begin your priestly ministry. That seems what the intention is of this vocational synthesis stage. So it's like to be more fully aware of your own identity as a priest, and like to
so
cultivate
maybe
that
it's the
priest
mentorship
identity.
piece of it.
I think it's the mentorship piece that they're going for. Of course, the problem is, and this is where I would say there's a big lack, is we don't have priests right now who are prepared to be mentors.
Aha.
Now,
so
for
if
years,
if
only
there
was
was
a way.
program
Only
to
there was a
train mentorship.
So I think for years we've been saying that, and studies have shown this too, that the most important thing that a priest gets is his first assignment. The quality of a priest's first assignment as a priest will tell you an awful lot about how he's going to do as a priest. The first 5 years of priesthood are crucial also, just as I think the first 5 years of marriage are crucial, right? A couple that makes it through 5 years of marriage is pretty likely to persevere, right, and to succeed. Same thing for a priest. If a priest makes it to 5 years, he's very likely to persevere.
We did a study early on, and we found that there's it's a 7 year. There's the 7 year itch that they talk about for marriage.
Okay,
which is actually shows up for priests as well.
At 7 years,
7 and 5 to 7. I'm sure it's very similar. But also after a second parent dies.
Yeah, that's a huge time for priests.
It's a huge spot where there's not enough support.
Yeah. If a priest's parents are living at the time that he's ordained,
because the first parent is hard, but there's still another parent. And then when that second parent dies, now like that whole support network, the fabric or that net is gone.
Right.
But so back to the first assignment.
So the first assignment is really crucial because a guy who has a good experience in his first assignment has a good pastor, who's a good priest, who's solid, who's able to help him through the growing pains of being a priest. Because like, you're a priest. I was talking to my parochial vicar today about how to do marriage prep intake, just to like greet a couple when they want to schedule a wedding, because he doesn't have experience with that. Even the weddings that I've given him this year, like, because they came in and I was the one who happened to answer the phone, I did all the intake for him. So like without any intention, I robbed him of that experience. So I was kind of giving him the step-by-step checklist.
You learned about that parenting style.
I did. So I was giving him the step-by-step checklist of this is what you do, this is how you do it. And he's perfectly capable of it. There's not an issue there. It's just that he hasn't actually done it. And he wants to make sure that he's doing things the way that they need to be done. Because, well, when you're doing intake for a couple that wants to get married, you need to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row, because that affects the validity of the sacrament.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal. It's not just about you. It's not just about being nice to people. It's about like making sure that they can actually receive the graces of the sacrament of matrimony. So it's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you've got in your first assignment a pastor who can walk you through all that stuff, or a pastor who can help you to handle the difficult pastoral situations that you're going to come up against, like a sudden death, and you're the one who has the funeral. Like, I was away and we had a death in the parish of a fairly young man And it was very sudden, and he left behind a wife and children, and his kids are not old by any stretch. And Father Brendan took that on, and he handled it so well. And I called him. I was out of the country, and I called him. We talked about it, and he did such a good job. But it's the kind of thing that first experience with a major death in a parish, that's a huge thing for a new priest to handle. Or even just like a quick review. How'd your first funeral go? I remember my first funeral. It was not for a young person. It was for a very elderly person, but I remember it. And I remember talking about it with my pastor afterwards. So those things that are really important in that first assignment, they go a long way. And even if there's difficult things in the first assignment, like in my first assignment, the pastor left the priesthood. That was difficult. But the first 2 years of that first assignment were great. It was awesome. And I was learning a ton. And then actually, even in the moment of a really difficult situation, the way that the people in the parish took care of me, like as their priest, they took care of me. And I knew that I had that support, and I knew that I had people with me. I think that makes up for a ton of stuff. So a priest's first assignment is huge, and it's both the pastor that he has and the kind of parish that he's in. If you send a newly ordained priest into a parish where the pastor regularly chews up his associates and spits them back out, or if you put a newly ordained priest in a parish where the personality of the parish is such that he's just going to be opposed no matter what he does, you're not setting him up for success. You want to set him up for a successful first experience, but also a supported first experience.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's a hugely important thing. But a piece that I think we're coming to understand more is that not every guy coming out of the seminary has the right understanding of how humans work, we could say.
Yes.
But I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, because I think part of the danger is we say, well, seminarians in general have no concept of real life. Like, these guys have every concept of real life. If you meet seminarians, you're going to find guys who have witnessed divorce in their own families, whether that's between their parents or the extended family. You're going to see guys who have experienced poverty, sickness, immigration. You're going to see them having experienced every possible human experience you can have and persevered through it, right? So it's not so much the seminarians broadly, but there's some particularities. We talk about this all the time when I was in seminary. Like, if you're here because you're afraid of something, you're in the wrong place. If you're here because you're trying to avoid dealing with something in the future, you don't want to have to deal with this kind of conflict or that kind of conflict, then this isn't really the place for you. The priesthood is not a refuge from different things. Maybe the monastery could be.
I mean, I talk about this in my own story. Like, I went into religious life, and because I was buried, I had a lot of wounds buried, and I was actually afraid of divorce. And I was running away from, and for my story, it was kind of like sort of a weird inner parts translation of never wanting to put kids through what I had been through because of my parents' divorce. And then I just came to find healing and peace in the monastery, in the friary. The friars are so wise that you go through 4 years of formation just as a brother before you even enter the seminary.
Right.
And I was, with some humility and self-awareness, I was fairly healthy. I was fairly, I was faithful, and I was, I had gone to Steubenville. I had been in therapy. I was pretty decently stable. Decent. And
we can work with decent.
That's what Father Benedict said. That's what he said. So, but
sounds like a very wise man.
But it took still 2.5 to 3 years for me to crack the shell to get down to the place where I could see the wounds of what I was actually running away from. And then another year of working on them in that space, a significant amount of prayer, spiritual direction, working with Father Benedict. And then I got to the place of freedom to really understand my vocation. I mean, how many guys are going into seminary, out of high school maybe, or maybe right out of college, and they don't do that work on themselves. They have no idea what they're actually looking for.
Well, you said
they might be decent.
You said the really important thing, though. When you went to the friary, you had 4 years or 3 years, was it, I can't remember how long you were in.
I was there almost 4 years, but like the point at which I started to see the wound was probably 2.5 years in.
But that became the place where the healing took it.
Yes.
Right. And so if we understand that we are not getting perfect specimens in our seminaries,
Sure.
we are getting wounded men in our seminaries. And actually, I think the current PPF is the response to that. So the program of priestly formation is adapted and updated every couple of years.
Right.
This is not a dead document that you just have to follow slavishly for decades upon decades. It's regularly up.
And so just to be clear, these are norms that are set up by the United States Conference.
No, by the Holy See.
Oh, the PPF is Holy See.
So what's challenging is that it's universal, and there might be particular adaptations that the U.S. has.
Okay.
So like this is how, like from the Ratio Fundamentalis that is given from the Vatican, the USCCB then forms their program.
Okay.
This is how we're going to do it here in the United
So
States.
this whole idea of vocational synthesis is a worldwide church directive?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. I actually didn't realize that.
Yeah. So I think it's important to respond. So like in the United States, we'd go, our guys are loaded with pastoral experiences from day one, just about. It's hard for us to understand exactly how this is supposed to work.
But they're coming in with some limitations in human formation.
Well,
And that's what.
so if we
seeing
look
now.
at what has changed, so I started seminary. I'm one of those guys who was decent and came out of high school. Right.
Right.
So I was decent entering seminary out of high school as a college seminarian, but that was 24 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So it's been a long time. And if we think about what the world has done, what has happened,
Right.
I started seminary 12 days before 9/11. All right. Now think of all the stuff that has happened in the life of the Catholic Church in the
Right.
United States since late August 2001.
Right.
So you have 9/11, you have the spotlight scandals in Boston, the Dallas Charter, all these things that happened. Well, the issues that were facing us are totally different. I didn't have a cell phone until I went to the seminary.
Wow.
I didn't know about, like, smartphones didn't exist
Right.
until I was in my third year of theology, and they were so expensive that I didn't own a smartphone of my own until I was already ordained a priest a couple years later. The idea of carrying around a smartphone seemed so weird to me, and now I fall firmly in the category of, oh no, this thing has taken total hold of my life. And, so the issues that guys are facing coming out of high school, coming out of college now, are totally different than the stuff
Sure.
that you and I faced when we were that age.
Yeah, I think that stands to reason. You look around, and there's just so that's a big part of what's happening. Is you have these guys coming in now. There's a great document by John Paul II called Pastores Dabo Vobis.
Love it.
And it talks about the 4 pillars of personal formation. It includes human formation, and then intellectual and spiritual and pastoral formation. So these 4 pillars are the work of the seminary. And the time period that you are entering in and that we've been talking about previously, with family life well established and fairly stable, guys were coming in with solid human formation.
Mm-hmm.
And what we talk about and break open as human formation is like the family is the school of love. And the basic principles of how to be human are taught in the family. Right. And you have a mom and a dad, and everybody knows what a man is and what a woman is. And, you have basic fundamentals that are just in place. And then we learn how to be in relationship with each other. You learn how to be for others.
Mm-hmm.
And then you step out into the world and build a good society.
Right.
That's human formation. Those guys might go into the seminary, and now it's like, okay, intellectual formation. You got to work on your theology and philosophy. And then you got spiritual formation. So you're growing in deeper relationship with God. And then pastoral formation, all of these other things that are added on with how to be of greater service. Right. Today, we're in a situation where the foundation is not settled. It's not established. It's maybe cracked.
I think the foundation might be fundamentally flawed for some guys, where they didn't grow up in that kind of family that provided good human formation, or that foundation has been so assaulted by the society that they're living in that it's just been damaged and damaged and damaged. And like, I think we have a lot of parents who are very just war-torn at this point, trying to protect their kids, their sons, and by some miracle, their kid still hears that call to the priesthood. and responds to it and responds well. But now we have these guys who are coming to the seminary for all of their virtue, for all of their goodness, for all of their courage. They're coming carrying wounds that previous generations of seminarians simply didn't have, because the things that are assaulting the family, that are coming after virtue, basic human formation, just weren't there.
Right.
Now they're so prevalent. So one of the things that's interesting in the new PPF is that starting as college seminarians, they can do 2 years of college before they get into this stage. But if they're just coming in, if they've already got a college degree, they immediately go into a 1-year probedeutic year. And it's spirituality, it's detox from technology. They have strict limits on how frequently they can use devices. Their internet connection is severed almost completely. I was talking to one of our seminarians the other day, and he just came back from a poverty immersion. I don't know exactly the parameters of it and exactly what the frame is, but they like hand him a bus ticket and $50 and tell him, you're going to this place, get off the bus in this city, and you're going to go to this address, and you're going to work at this homeless shelter or in this monastery. They're going to provide a place
That's
for
in
you
our
to stay.
diocese?
So it doesn't happen in our diocese.
The guy was from our diocese?
But the guy's from our diocese.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So like they get this experience of like, all right, you're going to go and you're going to learn what it's like to not have the luxury of just hopping in your car and going wherever you want. You're going to learn what it's like to have to ask directions. You're going to learn what it's like to not have a phone with you, and how there are a ton of people out there who live this way.
Yeah, wow.
Can you imagine that?
That's amazing.
Right? Now, I mean, once upon a time, that was normal.
Right.
Like when I was in seminary, all right, so I had this experience because we didn't have cell phones.
Right. That was just your life.
It was just...
Your life was poverty immersion.
Exactly. And like, well, they would kick us out of the seminary, right? So you had to leave. It was like, I mean, not a strict rule, but like going to the seminary in Rome, the rule was get out of the house once a week, get out of the city once a month, get out of the country at least once a semester. And so Christmas break, Easter break, those are your once a semester chances to leave Italy.
Wow.
And it's like, how do you do that when you don't have an income? Well, you find places to stay that are free. A church or somebody, a monastery or something is willing to take you in and give you either free lodging or cheap lodging. And then what's the cheapest way to get there? You find the discount airline, or you take the like third class coach train to wherever, and you hop buses and subways, and you'd never take a taxi because that's way too expensive.
Yeah.
And so you're just like walking around Europe with a backpack and trying to figure it out. And it's actually not that bad.
Yeah, it's a great experience.
It's so good, but you have to learn how to do this stuff. So anyway, like these guys coming into seminary now, I think need a lot more. So the propedeutic year, I'm such a huge fan of. I think it's awesome. What I see is that a lot of the stuff that happens in level 1 of the certification could be applied to that propedeutic year. Because a lot of what's happening in level 1 of the certification is your eyes are being opened to some of the places where there's wounds that you carry, where there's things that you maybe have unconsciously held on to, or there's stuff that you know you need to deal with, and it's starting to give you the roadmap.
And also the positive side of that is the roadmap of sort of looking ahead with the spiritual integration with Father Benedict Rochelle and understanding a psychological roadmap to growing in holiness in relationship with God.
Yeah,
because I think a lot of guys don't have a balanced spirituality. Like even if they're good men, I think because of the onslaught of society on the bedrock and foundation that we're coming in, I think where guys are at, even if they're Orthodox, that's where we get into this sort of camp of the super trads and like, you know, and then people get locked into these certain things. Now, with all else being equal, like if that's the problem, that's a good problem to have, right? But it's still not like the full maturity of the roadmap.
Right. Well, you still need to learn how to pray.
Well, yeah.
It's perfectly okay for somebody to have aesthetic preferences.
Sure.
To say like, I like this kind of music. I find that this type of mass helps me to pray the best way. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you still have to know how to pray. And this is where I think the beginning lessons of spirituality and kind of like mapping out as you do in that first level, the different stages of spiritual development and just realizing, oh, where am I in my spiritual development? Or where have I been? Have I gotten past this thing? Oh, maybe there's still some work for me to do.
But and also not knowing how to relate to a lot of people. Like there could be those little blocks, those little blind spots.
Sure.
You know, and so then when it comes to pastoral effectiveness, like, I mean, I know somebody that I know the priest, and I know he's very faithful, but very traditional, and, have the highest regard for him. And then I happened to come across a parishioner of his, and I was really blindsided by the parishioner's like total negative evaluation of the priest. It wasn't even no. I don't know how to tell you this, Father, but it was Barbara. She was the one with the opinion. No.
Can you imagine if like you and I got along and Barbara just hated my guts? Can you
I really
imagine?
Can't stand his homilies. No, this is not you at all. So
okay,
this is totally somebody else. But it was just shocking to me because I had never seen this priest from the perspective of like somebody sitting in the pew.
Yeah.
And I know the priest, and he's got a good heart, and I know like his faith is really solid.
Yeah.
And I would imagine he knows how to pray, but he doesn't know how to connect with people.
Yeah.
That's what we're now facing in the church, is like our best priests, because they're faithful and not getting into trouble, aren't necessarily actually connecting with people.
Yeah.
So the human formation and the deeper formation, I think, is really important.
Yeah. And this is something that came up actually in a conversation recently for me. So I think you're right. The deeper formation that helps guys to relate, that helps guys to just understand how human beings work, and to like when I can understand people at a different level than just what's presented in front of me, that's always good, right? But our first instinct is you judge a book by its cover.
Right.
And this is where I think CPMAP is so helpful for priests. There's a lot of stuff we can do in seminary to prepare guys, but there's a lot of stuff that priests need as they go along. And this is what really got unlocked for me, was the desire for ongoing formation for priests. And this is something that I had never felt before. I never really cared much about ongoing formation for priests. And then all of a sudden I started to realize just what a terrible job we do of continuing to form priests. I think the seminaries, as a general rule, really do a good job. The PPF is a good document. It's a living document, so it's constantly being adjusted and everything, but it's good. And we touch on a lot of the stuff that has to be done, but then there are certain things in priestly ministry that you can't guarantee. We got into a habit, especially after the Dallas Charter, of trying to be preventative about everything. But some of the things that we were being preventative about were not for the health and well-being of the men becoming priests. It was more, we're going to try to prevent scandals from ever happening. We're going to try to prevent anybody from ever being a victim of a priest's bad behavior, which is a noble goal. I'm not opposed to that, right? Like, I support that idea. But we did some of that at the cost of actually helping priests to know how to act in an integrated way. I would say this: if there was something missing in my own formation, it was, how high is the bar for virtue and for real goodness? And then how do you relate to people in a way that is virtuous?
Yeah.
A lot of times what we learned about boundaries was more appearance. Make sure that the boundaries that you have with people keep up the proper appearances, which is actually really important. You don't want people to get the wrong idea and then gossip starts and people have questions, because let me tell you, as soon as those questions start, they never go away. So you've got to make sure that you are keeping appropriate boundaries in your behavior. So in all the external observable things, you do that. Okay, that's all true. But sometimes that was as far as it really went. And there wasn't a sense of, what is a boundary on an emotional level? What is a boundary for your own safety and for your own sense of well-being and health?
How is it a matter of justice and of friendship and of love?
And then another thing that comes up very often in seminary formation is the idea that the priest has to be radically available. Because we've seen too many times the priest who isn't available.
Yeah.
And so the sort of counteraction to that is the priest having radical availability, and then the priest loses any sense that he's allowed to have time to himself, that he's allowed to rest. And we have too many priests who end up workaholics, who end up feeling burned out, who end up feeling like they have to do everything.
Yeah.
And then compound that with what has happened now in the church in the United States, at least, where we have fewer vocations to the priesthood. We have declining numbers. And so priests, guys who started seminary at one time when the church looked this way and the numbers were, much higher and finances were in better shape and everything like that, suddenly find themselves pastors. And the money that used to be there really easily isn't there. inflation in our economy changes that, and then parish numbers are different, and then you don't do exactly the same thing that your predecessor did, and so some people decide that they're going to follow your predecessor to the new parish that he's at, or they're going to go to the other parish across town and see how that feels for a little while.
Sorry, Father. It was not about you. We moved.
Or they just pack up and leave town and don't even tell you about it. You'll have these guys now going into parishes, and there's an expectation like, well, you're going to maintain this parish at the same level that it's always been, except that the parish staff is now 20 years older than it used to be. This priest was at his heyday as pastor. He had a brand new staff functioning. They're now 20 years into their job and not really happy. Parish numbers have declined. You have fewer weddings. You have fewer baptisms every year. You have more.
So listen, I'm getting depressed just listening to this. I want to. We need hope. So we need light here. What are you doing?
This is the light. This is the light. It's so good.
Set the stage. It's so good. You set the stage. Now,
I don't mean to be depressing.
Bring us the hope. What are you doing with your capstone?
In all of that, you realize there's a need to help these priests to step out of that maintenance mode. And I think there's a huge desire. I've wanted to break out of maintenance mode for a long time in my own life. And I'm still working on that, by the way. I would not say that I'm out of maintenance mode entirely. There's still areas of my life where I'm just kind of making sure that I keep things running. But there's so much out there, and there's so many guys, so many priests who want to see their parishes thrive, who want to have a healthier sense of themselves, and they're looking for it. What I found happening as I was going through the certification was not only recognizing my own weaknesses, my own wounds, the places where I needed healing, the places where I had picked up habits along the way in terms of relationships, in the way that I approached people, sometimes the way that I just already had the narrative in my head as soon as I met somebody. I realized that needs to be healed. And so both on an emotional level, psychological level, a spiritual level, like all these things were happening where that was all starting to lift and I was starting to be more integrated, which is really what I needed. I said, all right, then I want to do something for priests. And that kind of came as the big surprise to me. There's sort of a twofold idea for this. On the one hand, I want priests to get certified. I want them to have this as ongoing formation because we need ongoing formation, especially as the needs of the church are changing and as the dynamics in most dioceses are changing. Diocesan priests especially, and I'm sure religious priests also. I can't speak. We got to get Father Agostino in here and ask him about religious priests. I can speak for diocesan priests. We need to do something to fix some of the stuff that's ailing us right now. And part of what's ailing us is adjusting to things that, like the circumstances of parish life and everything in a lot of places, we need to learn how to adjust with that, but in a way that's healthy, in a way that's integrated. I want as many priests as possible to get certified in this because it changed the way that I approached confession. It changed the way that I approached counseling, marriage prep, you name it. I'm so much better equipped to actually walk with people now. But that also means that I feel differently about my parish and about how the parish is operating. So it means I'm interacting differently with my staff. And it's not perfect because I'm not perfect. And I know that now. No, I've always known that. But now, now my imperfections don't feel like the burden that they were. The fact that I'm not perfect at this was a huge negative for me in a lot of ways. And now it's no, I can accept that I'm not perfect and I need to improve and I'm going to work on it. I'm going to be merciful to myself, but I'm accountable in a great way. So I want to see as many priests as possible do this. So you and I had the chance to sit down with Bishop Caggiano and talk to him about this. And he very graciously gave us some time at a presbyteral meeting. And we've got 5 priests from the Diocese of Bridgeport now who are going to be students in the CPMAP.
Yeah,
two have started and 3 are starting in a couple months.
Yeah, and just as a pilot, really. And then he said, depending on how it goes with these 5, then
I can tell you,
get even more funding and open it up for even more priests.
Yeah, I can tell you one of them said to me after his second week, he said, first of all, it's like having a private retreat every week, doing these lectures and doing these readings. It's amazing. And he said, and this is the stuff that they should be teaching in seminary. Now, he's a newly ordained priest. And so a big thing that I was thinking was this, I want priests to do this in general,
Yeah.
but I especially want this for newly ordained priests.
Yeah.
Because that vocational synthesis piece, where there's stuff that you can do in seminary and stuff that you have to learn on the job. Well, the stuff that you can learn on the job has changed. And the stuff that you can do in seminary has changed because the needs of the men coming into seminary has changed.
Yeah.
So I really see CPMAP in a particular way as being a great thing for newly ordained priests. But if we're going to do that vocational synthesis, we need pastors who are well-formed and who know how to do mentorship.
Mentors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this is where, like, it wouldn't be the mentorship model necessarily that you use with Voxer and Catholic Psych, that model necessarily.
Yeah, it's just one modality.
Exactly. But to know how to mentor somebody.
Right.
And how to recognize the stuff that they're dealing with and how to help them through that.
As we become sort of more of a known entity and what we've developed is more common, we've really integrated those 4 pillars of formation.
Yeah.
And so we take the human, the intellectual, the spiritual, and the pastoral, and we wrap those together in an experience of an integrated mentorship, which is why it's not the modality that matters.
Right.
Which is why therapists can do what we're using our model. They can use our model of the person and our model of accompaniment in that modality of therapy. You could use it in the modality of teaching. You can use it in the modality of spiritual direction. And you can mentor other priests.
I think the specific modality of Voxer can actually go a long way in pastoral ministry.
Sure.
Like it's a great thing for priests to learn how to use because it can transform the way that they do things. Like
it's a great teaching tool for us because it does break open a lot of the different dimensions. The only point is it's not limited to only
right.
Yeah.
Then so I want to see that happen. I want to see priests like get into the certification and learn these skills because there's such a need for it. And every parish needs this. There are people in every parish who are struggling, who are facing this. And a lot of priests, I think right now, are not feeling super equipped to handle the anxieties, the depression that they see, the mental illness. They're not feeling very well equipped to handle the tough pastoral situations that are coming up with sexuality and gender. They're not feeling especially well equipped to deal with the stresses of dioceses that are reconfiguring parishes and the added responsibilities, stuff that was once the responsibility of 3 priests at a parish is now the responsibility of 1 guy. And so on a personal level, priests need that help. On an intellectual level, they need that help. They need the support, and this provides that ongoing support so they can feel like they can actually respond to this, because all of the problems that we have in the world have responses, right? There's actually is an answer.
Yeah.
It might take us a while to figure it out. It might take us a while to like massage that answer, but there's a pathway. There's a way that we can find it. And what the certification provides is the confidence to follow the path.
Amen. Yeah, well, that's what we're setting out to do. So one person at a time and one capstone at a time.
Can I give you the second part of the capstone, though?
Oh, yeah.
Because the second piece is, I think there are a lot of priests out there who don't just need certification and training, but who need mentorship.
Oh, I see. I thought the second part was backing it up into the seminary, like beginning with
That's like
year, going
I can't decide if that's 1.A or if that's if that's actually a third part. I haven't figured that out. So no, the other thing that I really want is for priests to be able to receive mentorship.
Oh yeah.
Even if they're not interested in doing certification, there are priests who, because of the ministry that they do, are facing trauma.
Yeah.
Guys who were perfectly healthy coming in, or at least decent, after a few years of priestly ministry, have faced
think
real
about how many
difficulties.
bishops need mentorship.
Yeah.
I mean, just that life is...
We have guys who are walking wounded out there.
Yeah.
And there are not many places where priests can go to get that support. There's a few really notable places where there's support offered to priests, where they're going to get good spiritual direction, where they're going to be loved and cared for.
Well, they're few and far between, and the number of priests needing it is overwhelming. So
and
we
unfortunately, some of the places that are designated as like places for priests to get help have a stigma attached that like if you went there, it means you did something bad and you're in trouble.
Sure.
Mentorship provides something, I think, for priests that is like, I'm not going away. I'm doing this while still active in ministry. I'm getting help that I need, but I don't have to go and like disappear for a couple of months or anything like that. And it's done in such a way that I'm receiving appropriate and helpful advice, insight, and it's helping me to heal. because it combines spiritual direction and psychology, guys who might be a little hesitant about therapy are able to stick with it.
More approachable, yeah.
And then guys who might be a little hesitant about spiritual direction, but pro-therapy, are able to get some of the spiritual direction that they actually need, and it unlocks some stuff for them. So I really want to be able to offer this to priests. So I was really excited because so far I've had takers on the education side doing the CPMAP certification. And I've been able to talk to a bunch of priests, not just from the diocese, but you've sent some guys my way to have conversations about doing the certification. It's been awesome. I love it. It's been so much fun talking to them. I haven't had too many takers on the priest side for mentorship.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think we've really made too much of a push to offer that yet.
Yeah.
But I think, historically, certification has been the harder sell.
Yeah.
Because of the time and cost and everything else included.
I have a whole other idea about doing mentorship with priests that I'm not willing to talk about.
We'll take care
we'll talk
of it
privately. We'll have a scotch
air.
or something and talk about that.
Well, we got to wrap it up for now, but I really appreciate your work, your heart, your spirit, your prayer. And it's been an awesome journey with you here. And really, really grateful.
I'm really grateful that you invited me into this because it has, without question, it's changed my life.
Beautiful.
Praise God. It has altered the whole course of my priesthood, and I'm so grateful.
Praise God.
Yeah.
Well, let's pray for all the people who still have yet to experience that.
But there'll be more.
Yeah, let there be more, for sure. Awesome. God bless you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to the Being Human podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help us spread the word and hear more, please head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and subscribe, as it really helps us to get our content out to more people. Be sure to listen next time as I take you deeper into what it means to be human. If you want more free content and information about what we do at the Catholic Psych Institute, head on over to CatholicPsych.com. God bless you.